destroyed are in the process of destroying our own planet. And I want to speak to you about that because coming from the Eastern tradition, like Jainism, since I was young, I've always seen the planet, the earth, and me as a communal thing. As in the reason that we're vegetarian is because that's the end process of our thinking of that plant is still me or that animal is still me. And growing up in the West, I haven't seen that dialogue. Like the way we speak in our language, I think language is such a major part in this, but the way our language is created is that we use words that would keep us and the planet as one rather than it being separate. So, but even then, I still think that we still have an issue of actually really comprehending what is actually happening. So how, like, I know you do this community resilience. How do you guys facilitate that process?
Yeah, really good question. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll talk about how we facilitate it, but also just to say, I think it's so important what you shared about the Jain tradition and that, those very deep roots into a worldview that's essentially that, we're all interconnected and that, we're all one. You can't separate these things. And, it's that teaching and that worldview which is really, which will save us. I don't anything. We can have all these technological advances and we can do, stop the carbon emissions if we can and, do all these things. But like, unless that deeper understanding that you articulated so beautifully, unless that is the foundation of our culture, none of it is going to work in the longer term anyway. So I do feel like that people, it is, and that worldview is not just restricted to people of faith. Of course, the Indian tradition, really encapsulates that worldview very beautifully, and it can, and the mystical traditions of all religions, it's there, but it's also not a religious thing. It's also an ecological thing. It's a scientific, something that physicists show us, that ecologists show us. It's that everything is interconnected and interpenetrating, and we can't survive if we separate things out. It's like we have to act and live from the whole. So I think it's really important what you said, and that philosophy definitely underlies how Ethelburgas works. So how we facilitate it? Yeah, really good question. And we've been inspired by the work of Professor Jem Bendell, among other people, who coined the phrase deep adaptation, which is this business of acknowledging that we may well have, people talk as if it's 5 to midnight the whole time, but actually deep adaptation is being realistic and saying, actually, do you know what? It's 5 past midnight. And like, yes, we need to stop, carbon emissions, but we also need to prepare for a lot of chaos, and that there are now cycles in place that we cannot now reverse, and that this is going to lead into an era of collapse. And that we have to prepare for that. We have to prepare for it emotionally, we have to prepare for it spiritually, and we have to prepare for it practically. So we've been very inspired by his work and that phrase, which has really started a whole movement of people that are thinking and acting the same way. And how we facilitate it is, we have in the past, up until the pandemic, we've worked in intense residentials. Because we feel one of the things that's really necessary is that we stop and that we take ourselves out of our normal routines and our normal patterns, and we put ourselves into a very different space. And the pandemic has done that for us in a really powerful way. So obviously now we're doing a lot of this online. But the first thing is to stop and extract yourself from the normal patterns of thinking. Secondly, we think it's one of the things that enables us to actually face the magnitude of the destruction that we're seeing around us is community. It's very hard to look into that abyss on your own. I would go as far as to say that, it's not even a good idea to look into that abyss on your own. You need to feel connected to other people in order to just feel safe and to be able to go on that journey. So we build very strong containers of relationships and create spaces where people are really free to talk about how they really feel, and actually to break through those kind of veneer of denial that exists for many people, which means that you can't really say things how they are. create strong containers of relationships. And then we look at the scenario, we explore scenarios, like what kinds of things people see happening in the future. And so we as facilitators don't impose anything on the groups we work with. We don't say it's going to be like this, this and this. We just say to the group, what kinds of scenarios do you see coming in the future? And those scenarios are in many people's minds already, and we know that there's the possibility for insect populations to collapse completely, and then for none of our food will be pollinated. We know there's the possibility for wildfires to wipe out huge swathes of wildlife. We know there's the possibility that our food security all over the world and in the UK can collapse. We know that there could be 3 or 4 dry summers, and we would actually be into a serious situation of not just distribution of food, but actual starvation in Europe. And people know these things, so we kind of elicit the scenarios from people, what they see in the future. And actually, a year ago or 2 years ago, working with this, disease and pandemics was one of the scenarios that were named. And people would see empty supermarket shelves because the food distribution chains had broken down. They would see disease, they'd see conflict, they'd see starvation, they'd see mass migration. And we know that the polar ice caps are melting, we know that the permafrost is melting, and we know that 600 million people live at sea level. So when the sea levels start to rise, those 600 million people will be moving. So we know all of those scenarios are in our minds, and so we get people to paint this picture of how the future could look,
Yeah.
And then by that point people are pretty freaked out.
Yeah, I was just thinking about myself. That's the most dystopian imagined future that I can think of. What is it going wrong? It seems like in every area of our normal life. But this is I think it's what we were referring to as well. Our place on this earth is so linked to the earth. It's so linked to all these various facets of existence. I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, but